Continuing our in Jeremiah, chapters 11 through 13 all deal with the covenant. And of course, covenants are extremely important. We live under a covenant today. Sometimes we call it the New Covenant. It probably goes by other names, but on pages 24 and 25 in our book, we will look at those questions and then kind of elaborate on them as we go. And if you have some comments about them and so forth, please bring those up. So first of all, would someone read the first 5 verses of chapter 11?
The word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Hear the words of this covenant, and speak to the men of Judah and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and say to them, Thus says the Lord God of Israel, Cursed is the man who does not obey the words of this covenant, which I commanded your fathers in the day I brought them out of the land of Egypt from the iron furnace, saying, Obey my voice, and do according to all that I command you. So shall you be my people, and I will be your God, that I may establish the oath which I have sworn to your fathers, to give them a land flowing with milk and honey, as it is this day. And I answered and said, So be it, Lord.
Okay. So there we have the introduction to this whole section in Jeremiah about covenants. And of course, when you go back and look at the first 10 chapters, Jeremiah, by inspiration, has elaborated on how God's people have broken away from Him, broken away from the covenant because of idolatry. They've gone away and worshipped idols. And we kind of mentioned quite a bit of that last Sunday morning. So with that idea of covenant, the first question is, drawing from the information given above, and that's in the reading. So this comes from a lot of places in the Old Testament. One great place is Deuteronomy 26 that talks about covenants. But after reading that material, what are some of the features of a covenant? All right? What are some of the features of a covenant? Promises, okay.
Conditions.
There's conditions, all right? And those conditions come with either blessings or curses. I mean, if you follow what God has said, and we're talking about a divine covenant here, if you follow what God has said, then there's going to be blessings. If you disobey what God has said, there's going to be curses. All right? That's part of a covenant. And when you look at any of the covenants in the Bible, that's part of it. There are, people in the covenant, they make a pledge. You go back to any of the covenants in the Old Testament, the people made pledges that they would do thus and so. Again, especially if you go back toward the end of Deuteronomy, where Moses kind of retells the law, that Mosaic covenant. The people make pledges that they will do thus and so, and that's part of it. So it's like a compact between people, almost like a constitution.
Contract.
Yeah. So that's what this is kind of all about. So question number 2 then is, when did God make a covenant with the nation of Israel, and how did this relate to Abraham? All right. Does anybody remember about the date? You can go back and kind of figure it up from the writing, but it's around 1440 BC, somewhere in that general time, somewhere around 1440 BC. But, and this is the real crux of question 2, what did that have to do with Abraham? Because Abraham had, he had been dead a long time by the time this covenant with Israel came about. So what did it have to do with Abraham?
He told Abraham he was going to make him a father of many nations.
That's right. And through him, yeah, that's right. Through Abraham, the seed would come, which was the Messiah. And the Messiah would come through that lineage. All right. So, yeah, Abraham had a major part to play. All right. In that very thing. So, okay. So, Jeremiah's job was to spread the word. He was supposed to be an evangelist right here, a herald. He was to go out and tell all the people these things, the blessings and the curses. All right, very good. Going on to question 3. Did Israel always keep the covenant that God made with the nation? No, certainly did not. All right. That's what verse 8 says. Yet they did not obey or incline their ear, but everyone followed the dictates of his evil heart. So, again, there was the covenant, and God said, if you do this, you'll be blessed. If you do this, you'll be cursed. So, even all the way back in the time of Moses, there in the end of Deuteronomy, God, through Moses, tells the people that if you do not follow my covenant and obey it, I will kick you out of the land. And of course, that was hundreds of years before it ever happened. Long, long time before it ever happened. So, there was that part of the covenant where God was very specific about what he was going to do. So, that was a critical part. See what I
also tell him that he knew that they weren't going to keep the covenant, and told him what he was going to do when they didn't.
Yeah.
All of that.
Very, very specific. Yeah, it was very specific.
Said, I know you're not going to keep the covenants, and when you don't, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, and they were supposed to go back and remember what had been told. Years and years before. What was in this Mosaic law, this covenant. All right, very good. So going on to question 4. Did Judah do any better than Israel? Okay, so Judah, southern kingdom, Israel, northern kingdom. Did Judah do any better than Israel in keeping the covenant of God? This is in verses 9 and 10. No. All right. He says in verse 10, they have turned back to the iniquities of their forefathers who refused to hear my words, and they've gone after other gods to serve them. The house of Israel and the house of Judah have broken my covenant. So both of them. Now, by the time of Jeremiah, the northern kingdom had been taken into captivity and was basically gone years and years before the time of Jeremiah. So they were gone. And again, it was because of idolatry. I mean, that was the prevailing sin among God's people. Northern kingdom, southern kingdom was idolatry. Yeah, they did other things too, but it was idolatry that was the main single thing that sent them into captivity, and that was going to cause all this destruction. All right. So, question 5, what was a major hindrance to the people of Judah in keeping God's covenant?
Worshipping other gods.
That's right. There it comes out again, worshiping other gods. And of course, that is, you go back to the 10 Commandments, it was right there at the beginning. Shall have no other gods before me. I mean, that was one of the main parts of that law of Moses, the covenant, was to not put any other type of idol of any kind before or above God, to make them a priority. But that's what they did. So worshiping idols. And he says, let's see, where did it go? I don't think we've got there yet. But anyway, verse 13 in that section ends up by talking about according to the number of your cities were your gods. He says you have as many gods as you have cities. And according to the number of the streets of Jerusalem, you set up altars. You have as many altars set up as there are streets in Jerusalem. So he was making that comparison, saying, look at how many idols and altars you have set up, and you've been specifically told to never ever do that. Do not make altars to any god. Don't make any type of wooden images or graven images. Over and over and over again, they were told that, but they kept doing it anyway. And as Jeremiah, I think we'll get to that today, God basically tells Jeremiah the people have gone too far. I'm done with them for now. And it was because of idolatry. All right. Then we move to question 6. How bad did things become for the Jews spiritually?
Well, they called upon him and he wouldn't answer.
Yeah. God says, I'm not going to listen to him anymore. All right. I gave them opportunity. All right. I had students this week that said the same thing. All right. I need some more opportunities to improve my grade. I need some more chances to improve my grade. And they were reminded of all the chances they had. And there was a point, okay, administration says, okay, grades are due today. You can't do any more. Sorry, it's done. Well, that's what these people were wanting, God said, I've given you every possible chance, every opportunity. And every once in a while, like in the days of Josiah, there would be a temporary time when the idols would be torn down, the altars torn down. But it was a very short time, and it was very temporary. And then the people went right back doing exactly what God told them not to do. So, yeah, there wasn't even any point in praying from verse 14. Not at all. Okay. Question 7 then. How did Jeremiah contrast the Jews' potential for good with the reality of their present apostasy? This is in verses 15 through 17. What did he compare them to? There was a comparison between this and that. It's in verse 16.
The tree.
Yeah. He says, I've, kind of made you this green olive tree and given you all of this and provided all of this for you. But instead, he says, I'm going to make a fire out of you. He says, I'm going to make that nice wood into a fire. So that was the contrast. They had all kinds of potential, but they didn't use it. And so God said, okay, you're like dead wood now, so I'm just going to burn you up. And of course, that's what's going to happen in the future. All right, question 8 then. How was Jeremiah's trusting nature illustrated, and how was it abused? This is verses 18 through 20. What did he say he was like in verse 19?
Little lamb.
Yeah, a docile lamb, right? He says, that's what I am like, but I'm being brought to the slaughter. Right? I'm being brought to the slaughter. The people are saying, let us destroy the tree with its fruit and let us cut him off from the land of the living. That's what the people, they were devising schemes against Jeremiah to get rid of him. They wanted him gone. They didn't like what he said. All right? And in particular, let's go ahead and go to the next question because this goes right along with it. Question 9, who saw Jeremiah's life and what was God's reaction to this? Who was it in particular?
The men of
Anathoth.
Anathoth.
The men of Anathoth, right? And what was God's reaction?
Gonna punish them.
Yeah, and there wouldn't even be a remnant of them. Now, he had already told them before that there would be a remnant of the whole nation. But of these particular conspirators, these men of Anathoth, God said, I'm going to destroy every last one of them. There's not even going to be one left. Not even a single one. So that's what he told Jeremiah. Not a single remnant would be left of the men of Anathoth. All right. So now we go into chapter 12. Jeremiah starts to question the Lord. And we kind of have deja vu with Job, right? And how he questioned God. This is what Jeremiah is going to do in chapter 12. So, question 10, what age-old question did Jeremiah raise with the Lord? And would someone read the first 3 verses, because this kind of sets the tone for the chapter. Chapter 12, verses 1 through 3.
Righteous are you, O Lord, when I plead with you. Yet let me talk with you about your judgments. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why are those happy who deal so treacherously? You have planted them, yes, they have taken root. They grow, yes, they bear fruit. You are near in their mouth, but far from their mind. But you, O Lord, know me. You have seen me. You have tested my heart towards you. Pull them out like sheep for the slaughter, and prepare them for the day of slaughter.
All right, it's almost like a court scene where Jeremiah is saying, God, I'm concerned you're not doing right. You're not making the right decisions because these evil, wicked people are still prospering. Of course, he's not the first to ask that question, and he won't be the last. Why do the wicked prosper? I mean, I don't like to see the wicked prosper. I don't like to see some drug lord have nicer cars than I have. I don't like to see the wicked prosper. Well, that's what Jeremiah was saying here. God, why are you allowing it? See, Jeremiah is trying to get an answer from God that he wants to hear. Jeremiah says, I want you, God, to kill all these people. It's what he's saying. Lead them to the slaughter. I want them dead. That's his humanity coming out. That's his human nature coming out. He wants evil, wicked men destroyed. And he can't figure out why God hadn't done it yet. Look at what all these people are doing to me. Why are you allowing them to even exist? So he says, how long? How much longer? You go to some of the Psalms of David. David asked the same questions in several of the Psalms. Why are you allowing the wicked to prosper? All right, so moving on. Question 11. Now God uses some illustrations. What illustrations did God use in his response to Jeremiah's complaint of weariness? This is verse 5, which says, if you've run with the footmen and they've wearied you, then how can you contend with horses? And if in the land of peace in which you trusted they wearied you, then how will you do in the floodplain of the Jordan? God is coming back and saying, Jeremiah, you ain't seen nothing yet. If you're tired with just running against people, how are you going to run against horses, which run many times faster? In other words, the worst is yet to come, Jeremiah. You're just barely feeling, the tip of the iceberg right now. It's going to get so much worse. It's going to get so much worse for you, Jeremiah. So you can't get tired now. You can't be wearied now. You've got to stick with it. So if you think things are bad now, just wait, God says. So don't complain now. That's what God's coming back and saying. Don't complain. Don't say you're tired. Don't say you're ready to give up. Because these are relatively good times compared to what's going to come. And of course, we start seeing that later in the book about all the things that Jeremiah has to go through. And it is bad. It's very bad what Jeremiah has to go through. So, He's trying to teach Jeremiah to be patient. You will be, and he's already told Jeremiah, you will be justified, but it's going to be down the road. It's not yet. Okay, question 12. What are some of the images of desolation that Jeremiah uses concerning the captivity of Judah? He uses all kinds of images here to describe how bad things are going to get.
A lion crying out.
Okay, like a lion in the forest that cries out against me, therefore I've hated it. All right.
Speckled bird of prey.
Pardon?
A speckled bird of prey.
Okay, speckled bird of prey. He uses that illustration. He goes on and talks about how the vineyards will be destroyed, how it's going to be like a desolate wilderness. Things are going to be desolate. There's going to be plunderers. From one end of the land to the other, no flesh shall have peace. Okay? No flesh shall have peace at all. So it is, he's through inspiration, God is telling Jeremiah how bad the land's going to be. And of course, after Nebuchadnezzar comes in and his army, it just wipes things out. Wipes out the land, the vineyards, wipes out the city of Jerusalem, destroys the temple, burns it, all of that. He even talks about reaping thorns in one place. That's how bad it's going to be. They've sown wheat but reaped thorns. Verse 13. So that's a depiction of how bad the land's going to be. And it is going to be really, really bad. So God is going to treat them like they have been treating him. That's kind of how it's looking. Predators will attack them, will attack God's people. So God did not want it to be this way. All right. He didn't want to punish his people, but he knew discipline was necessary. The writer of Hebrews talks about how God disciplines us today, but he disciplines us to make us better. That's what God is doing to the nation of Judah, is he's disciplining them in order to make them a better people, and in particular, to rid them of idolatry. To get rid of idolatry. All right. So, basically, no one is safe. So then verses 14 through 17 says, what is the only hope for the nations that have attacked Israel? So now we're talking about the nations. What's their hope? What do they need to do? That's verses 16 and 17. That's right. So the nations that were going to attack God's people, if their only hope would be for them to change and turn to the Lord and follow him. Learn carefully the ways of my people and swear by my name. That's what he says, that's your only hope. If you don't, then God's going to pluck them up and destroy that nation as well. And of course, that's what he does to the nation of Babylon. He brings Persia in and takes away Babylon. All right. 14. Now we move to the last chapter in this section, 13, where he uses more symbolism. Question 14. Describe the symbolic action of Jeremiah concerning the sash and explain its meaning. That's all the way through the first 11 verses. So what was this all about? The sash. What was he supposed to do with it?
Goes around the waist.
Okay, it goes, it's like a loincloth type thing, a belt sort of thing, that it would hold your upper garment kind of intact. And then what was he supposed to do with it? He was going to take it somewhere. And what was he going to do with it?
5, it talks about hiding.
Yeah, he was supposed to take it to the river Euphrates. And that was like 300 miles away. So if he walked 15 or 20 miles a day, you're still talking about at least 2 to 3 weeks of walking to the river. He's supposed to leave the sash there, put it under a rock, and come back. Well, what's going to happen to it? You leave it outside under a rock, it's going to get dirty, it'll start to rot, and it'll be completely useless. And of course, he's using that to describe God's people. That's what God's people had become. They had become dirty and useless because of their idolatry. And again, it's a lesson to try and get his people to understand from God's viewpoint what idolatry had done to the people. And so he's trying to get them to understand this whole idea of idolatry and how it makes people dirty and worthless. So he moves on and says, question 15, what is the message of the wine bottles? Okay, this is in 12 through 14. What's he going to do to them?
You like they're drunk?
Yeah, and then what's he going to do with that bottle? A lot of drunks do this.
Break it.
Throw it on the ground and break it, and it's destroyed. And what good is it after that? None whatsoever. He says, I will dash them one against another.
You will not have pity nor spare.
Yeah, no pity. God's not going to have any pity. And when you read about the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, God didn't hold back. I mean, countless people died. Many of them died horribly. And all that city and the walls, the temple and everything was just totally destroyed because God basically turned it over to the Babylonians, and they were able to do whatever they wanted to the people. Okay. Question 16. What part did pride play in the fall of Judah? This is verses 15 through 19.
We know what pride does.
Yeah. Pride comes before destruction, doesn't it? That's what the writer of Proverbs tells us. Comes before destruction. It was a major problem with them. They were proud of their idols. They were proud of their idol worship and what it did. And they were not repentant of their idolatry. Instead, they were proud of it. All right. 17. Did there seem to be any hope at this time of turning the people away from their sins?
Can the Ethiopian change his skin or the leopard in spots?
That's right. And of course, the answer to that is no. And so that's what God is basically telling them. They're not going to turn away on their own. So this whole idea is for them to hopefully turn back to God and get rid of their idolatry. And then lastly, what was the future of the nation and how was the people's coming shame illustrated? In 24, it says, I will scatter them like stubble. I mean, that's what happened to them. The ones that didn't die in the battles, then they were taken into captivity. They were sent everywhere. Some were left in the land with, the land had been destroyed, so they didn't have hardly anything. And what was their shame likened to? Verse 26.
Like showing,
Yeah, like showing your nakedness to the world. Lifting your skirts above your face. And that's how God was describing their shame. Because they would be filled with shame eventually. You know, their whole city and temple and their everything was going to be destroyed and people died. And that's how he was illustrating their shame. Was just like that. So, tremendous lessons for the world, for Christians today about setting up idols and having idols and putting idols first. Anything that comes before God is an idol. He talks about, I don't remember what verse it was in John, somewhere, 1 John 5 probably is where he talks about it. I don't remember now. But John talks about, and he ends it by saying, flee from idolatry. And that was in the first century. Flee from idolatry. And that is good advice, sound advice for everyone. Flee from idolatry. Anything that you put before God becomes your idol. And of course that can be hundreds of different things. But the lesson is the same. The lesson is the same. God does not allow anything to be put before him at all. And we see the repercussions in what happened to Judah. All right. Well, Lord willing, and again, I'm not sure if Robert's going to have the lesson next week. If he doesn't, we'll be into chapter 14, which talks about what God is going to do. All right. Thank you very much.